Okay, hi everybody. It's always an honor to be in conversation, and it's an honor to be here this evening. And of course, as I always say whenever I'm in the presence of my parents, it's an honor to have my parents here as well this evening.
Where are your parents?
They're here. You'll have to guess which ones.
Oh, there they are.
It might be the one with the sign that says "Go, Rabbi David." That might be the one.
Very nice.
It's obviously a very important evening. Obviously, given the recent developments, and especially given last night, and what it is to be living right now as a Jew in Israel for sure, and we have brothers and sisters and family and all of our friends that are there, and a country that experienced almost a miracle, we might say, last night in the way that it responded and was able to respond to a very significant escalation from an enemy, a known enemy, an enemy that was in the shadows for so long, but for all of us, we all knew who they were. But back at home here, which is the focus of our evening tonight, we'll get to a little bit more of what happened last night. First of all, it's really good to be in conversation with you, and it's really exciting on some level to hear about the new campus report. But I wanted to begin the conversation by at least starting with the ADL's mission, its statement, right? The raison d'etre of the ADL is to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment for all. So clearly there are two components to that, right? The defamation of the Jewish people and justice and fair treatment for all. Given, right, that we're discussing antisemitism tonight, and that's really clearly the first part of the mission.
Yeah.
It's been kind of, what does success on campuses look like when fighting defamation of the Jewish people? What does it look like to be, what's your vision of a successful, campus reality where Jews are not being defamed? What does that look like?
So let me try to answer that question, and let me use a word that's kind of out of vogue these days, like put it in context, but not that kind of context. First of all, I would just say, what a privilege it is to be here with you, Rabbi Ingber. We all know Romamu, I'm sure you have congregants here in the audience, and so it's a pleasure to be here for that. Thank you. And it's exciting for me to be here at 92Y, having this conversation here, and I really appreciate what Seth and the whole leadership team has done with this place in recent years. And it's become a really important, it always was important, but I think Seth's willingness to assert that we are a Zionist institution and we're not going to shrink from that. We have values. We have values, and we're going to live by those values. It matters so much. So credit to him. And we have values at ADL. And our values are, if I could use a term, our covenantal values are that we believe that stopping the defamation of the Jewish people and securing justice and fair treatment to all go together. Mm-hmm. And when this organization was founded over 110 years ago, in the wake of the Leo Frank trial, and I'm guessing everyone in this room knows that story, so I'm not going to recount it, at a time when Jews in this country faced what we would characterize today as systemic discrimination. They couldn't work in many professions. They couldn't get medical treatment in many places right here in this city. That's why we have Mount Sinai Hospital. As I'm sure many of you know, Mount Sinai Hospital, when it was founded by Jewish doctors, because Jews couldn't get treatment, you could bleed out in front of what we now know as Cornell Presbyterian. They wouldn't take you in if you were a Jew. And that's why Jewish doctors founded what they called the Jews' Hospital. So there was a time 100 plus years ago when Jews couldn't get treatment, and we know it, we're going to talk about campuses. If Jews were at a university, their numbers were artificially reduced, if they were admitted at all, and they were routinely slandered in the media. And in that environment of, again, what I will describe as pervasive hostility, these individuals founded ADL. What's remarkable is this idea that they linked the fate of Jews to the fate of others. Because they didn't have language like intersectionality or social justice, but they did have Hillel. They did have our tradition of loving thy neighbor. And this was fundamental, and we still have that, live by that value today, this notion that Jews can really, truly only be safe if everyone is safe. But there's another side to that. The other side to that is everyone isn't safe if the Jews aren't safe. That's sort of the inversion, or a different way to look at that same mission statement. And let me tell you something. The people on the streets of Toronto or in neighborhoods in Brooklyn who are cheering rockets being fired to Israel, who are cheering the deployment of explosive UAVs, these are not our friends.
Right.
These are not your friends. These are not people, individuals, organizations who are just opposed to the Jewish state. They're opposed to this state. They're opposed to a state of order like we have right now. And I'm sorry, if your notion of liberation involves the extermination of Jews, or if it would somehow say, rape is a legitimate form of resistance, I'm sorry.
Right.
So I bring it back because this is why ADL was founded. ADL was founded to protect Jews. I mean, that's why we exist, right? We do not exist to fight for the First Amendment. That's Anthony Romero and the ACLU. No, I say that in fairness.
Right.
We will use the First Amendment. I will ferociously fight for the First Amendment, but it is a means to an end, and that end is the protection of the Jewish people. But as we are being reminded in these days, right now, that our protection is actually everyone's protection. And again, maybe if you're not Jewish, or you're not tuned into this, you don't see it, but as it goes for the Jews, so it goes for everyone.
Do you see, we'll come back to the campus since you opened up this broader question, but how would you respond to someone who would say that maybe at one point it wasn't a zero-sum game, but with limited resources and with the amount of anti-Semitism that is rising, literally, exponentially by the week, I've been saying, and again, I don't want to be political at this moment, but there was a candidate who is now again running for president. Whatever you think about this candidate, there was an introduction to the way that people started to speak that maybe until that point there wasn't that level of speech in political discourse.
Yeah.
I almost feel like now anti-Semitism actually, similarly, there's been a breaching of what's all right to say in public. What we saw on October 8th is just absolutely mind-boggling to imagine that there could be anyone who would see what happened on October 7th and to the slaughter, the massacre, the pogrom, the atrocities, the inhumanity, the barbarism, and still be able to call themselves a sane or rational person and call that resistance. Like, it doesn't equate for me. And so with all of that happening, what if somebody were to say to you, yeah, it's great that you make this assertion that as we go, as the Jews go, so the world goes, and vice versa, but you have limited resources. And with so much anti-Semitism, might it just be smart to focus exclusively on combating anti-Semitism and let the rest of the world worry about fairness for the rest of the world?
Yes.
So you would answer yes, that makes sense.
All have to make decisions, whether you're buying groceries, or whether you're running a multi-billion-dollar corporation, or you're the head of a nonprofit like the ADL. So, and what I mean by that is, we are going to release numbers on let me step back. So we're a very data-driven organization. Now, we are focused on facts. We ground our work in evidence and research. And so two of the kind of planks that hold up our work are, number one, we do attitudinal work. We've been measuring anti-Semitic attitudes in the general population since 1964. So we have better longitudinal data on this than like the Pew or anybody else. And what I can tell you is when we started to do this work in 1964, roughly 30% of Americans non-Jewish Americans, had what we would consider extensive anti-Semitic views. Roughly 30%. That's a lot. That's a lot. So over the years, and we can talk about why, that number went down, 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 and stayed roughly between 8 and 12%. Now, by the way, 8%, 10%, that's still a lot of people in a country, 300 plus million, but whatever. We ran this survey. So this is like a sentiment analysis, right? Where people take a survey, they don't know what it's about, they answer a lot of questions, and our kind of our research team, we have a team of PhDs at ADL who lead our research department. When we work with other like very trained academics and professionals, we work through the data to get to this basic data point, which is what's the percent of the population. Okay, so 8 to 12%. We ran the survey in 2019, roughly 11%. That's actually what we expect. Now, we can talk about why we have to expect that 10% of the population being intensely anti-Semitic is acceptable, but let's put that aside.
Okay.
We ran the data again in 2022, 20%. 20%. 20%. We ran the survey again at the beginning of this year, 24%.
Yeah.
So from 2019 to 24%, the number more than doubled of Americans who unwittingly informed us they have intense anti-Semitic attitudes. And we can double-click on age, if you want, and politics, if you like political leanings, geography, and we can talk about that. So first we look at the data in terms of attitudes. Attitudes are going in the wrong direction. That 24% is the highest number we have seen in generations. Then we look at incidents at ADL. So again, we bookend attitudes with incidents. So what's an incident, anti-Semitic incident? We basically track hate crimes focused on Jewish individuals or institutions, as well as bias incidents. Bias incidents are things like you get discriminated against at work. That won't get law enforcement's attention, but it would get our attention, okay? Or your child gets bullied at school. That's a good one. A child gets bullied at school. Very painful. Police aren't going to help you. Often the principal won't help you, but ADL will. So when I say we track this, we work with law enforcement, as well as we get calls and we investigate. So we only publish what we have verified, either from a law enforcement agency or our own work. We have 500 full-time people at ADL. We spend a lot of time doing this work. All right, so roughly 10 years ago, the number, and we've been doing this work for 45 years. We have 25 offices that collect information. Say in the 1970s, and really going forward, roughly 700 to 900 anti-Semitic incidents a year. So again, let's just hold on to that, Rabbi, for a minute. 700 to 900, okay? And then starting in 2016, that number started to change dramatically. And then in recent years, we've had in 2019, 21, 22 record highs every year. And we will release the 23 data on Tuesday. And without breaking any news here today, Juju, put your notebook away.
Yeah.
What I'm going to tell you is the number that we'll release on Tuesday is going to blow your minds, and not in a good way.
Right.
So if we look at attitudes and we look at incidents, I can tell you empirically that something is definitely changing in this country.
Yeah.
And so I come back to your question, which is, where do you prioritize? We are prioritizing right now, with every fiber of our being, the fight against anti-Semitism. Because we have no choice. And anybody who tells you, well, I think they should do more. Well, I think we need to choose we need to be a little more selective. Look, this is not a fire. This is a 5-alarm fire.
Right.
This house is on fire, and it risks setting the whole neighborhood ablaze. That's why, from the moment I wake up in the morning to when I put my head on the pillow at night, the only thing I'm thinking about is, how do I protect the Jewish people?
So with that, as a kind of, again, a segue back into the topic of the evening, because anti-Semitism is huge, as you just described, and we have a particular focus tonight on tackling anti-Semitism on campuses. And I just say, from a very personal level, my parents are here, my sister and brother who are watching. My niece was one of the NYU students that was accosted.
Really?
Yeah, she's one of
the Cooper Union in the students
not
there?
Not in the Cooper Union, but at NYU.
Okay.
And in the library.
Yeah, I remember it.
So
I didn't know she was your daughter.
We're looking at a huge phenomenon. And of course it's not new. I mean, that's the thing. Of course, we've seen maybe it hit its apex, its apotheosis in October 8th and weeks around there. But that was just making very obvious, very clear what was already a rampant problem Even 10 years ago, there was you and I discussed before we came out, a letter. I'll just read a letter that was written by Seth Brisk, who worked for you at the ADL, who wrote a letter to the president of UC Davis in 2014, a decade ago, and it could have been written 6 months ago. I mean, Jewish students do not feel safe on campus today, he wrote that levels of anti-Semitism had skyrocketed, and he actually gave UC Davis suggestions on how to implement it. And so we know that the ADL's Not on My Campus initiative reports that maybe a third of students feel emotionally safe on campus since 10/7. But when I look back at that Seth Brisk letter and the recommendations that were made, it's clear that 10 years later it didn't work.
Yeah.
So I guess talk about the campus report card and how you guys are tackling what seems to be an intractable problem that doesn't seem to go away. But let's talk about that. Let's get into the meat of that.
So, look, colleges have always been, colleges, universities, these campuses have been hotbeds of activism, right? That isn't new. I mean, you can go back, I think, to the 60s in America as a very obvious moment when this really kind of burst forward. What we're seeing today is something very different, where I think campuses are being almost instrumentalized, almost manipulated in ways that are demonstrably, again, I think empirically, bad for the Jews. And I think this sort of siren song of anti-Zionism, as if that were some way to solve the world's problems, has seeped in so deeply, and it's gotten wrapped up in this rhetoric about decolonization and imperialism and this and that and the other. And for far too long, many of us didn't take it seriously enough. And I really think, I've been at this job 8 years, and I got to own it. And I think everyone in organized Jewish community needs to own it, that we did not do enough. Now, yes, we wrote letters 10 years ago. Yes, we were wringing our hands. Oh, this is bad. But I must tell you, I think I was mentioning this in the other room, I spent Thursday up in Cambridge at Harvard Law School. And I gotta tell you, it was an incredibly, not just sobering, and not just terrifying, it was dispiriting to meet these students and to hear their experiences. And these are not fringe kids. This is the creme de la creme. And by the way, I'm not talking about the Jewish students. I'm talking about the ones who are hounding them, who are haranguing them, who are intimidating them, who think it is permissible to essentially threaten their peers. And so the campuses are, at the risk of oversimplifying, the campuses are a mess. And my view is that, look, if someone were to ask me, what's your style of management at ADL? My strategy is innovation and partnerships. And when I look at these campuses, we have not done enough to hold them to account. Mm-hmm. So I will say right here, right now, thank God for Mark Rowan. Mm-hmm. And you may not like him, but thank God for Bill Ackman. Because the two of them, shone a spotlight. And again, we don't have to agree with everything they believe or every tactic, but they have a certain place in the public conversation that they lifted this up. And what I would say is, in order to solve this problem, we need to innovate and try new stuff, which is why we did the report card.
So tell us about the report card.
So look, I've gotten a lot of very difficult emails in the last couple of days from Hillel directors and parents and university presidents. How can you give us an F or a D or a C? You know what? How could I not? How could I not? So it is certainly fair to say that it is unfair to distill all dimensions of Jewish life at a place into a single letter grade. But I got to tell you, grades, and we know this, those of you who are parents or those of you who are students, grades have a way of focusing the mind. Mm-hmm. Grades have a way of letting you know you either on track or you are off track. And let me tell you something, our universities are off track. Mm-hmm. So what we did was what we do at ADL. We assembled a panel of experts, some of those PhDs. We assembled, when I say panel of experts, people on the outside, professors, former university presidents, other people with expertise. We looked at a range of data. We consulted with Hillel International and their campus climate study. We reviewed other materials. We looked at the president's national strategy to combat anti-Semitism. And we basically laid out 3 categories: Jewish life, administrative actions, if you will, policies, how to deal with anti-Semitism, and anti-Semitic incidents on campus. And then we had categories beneath it. And then we evaluated that, weighted it, and assigned grades. Now, there's no curve here, right? There isn't.
Right.
Like, I'd like everyone to get A's.
Right.
But so many of these schools are simply put failing. And so,
Can you give a couple, maybe, are there any surprises on the list or things that we might be like, oh?
it should surprise you, but maybe it doesn't, that Harvard and Stanford and MIT get F's. It should surprise you that Columbia, right on the other side, right over here, or Northwestern, or Berkeley get D's. Like, how can our most prestigious institutions, producing the next set of professors, and by the way, journalists, and by the way, judges, and by the way, elected officials, do so poorly in terms of simply protecting their Jewish students?
Can you help tease out, I mean, obviously the big elephant in the room is the Zionist question, and the approach, how you answer this question is itself extremely nuanced and complicated. We do have a history of anti-Zionist thinkers who were Jews and good Jews, and before the State of Israel, I mean, anti-Zionism
I am
was...
so tired.
Yeah, so I want you to, right, so me too. So I just wanted to set it up. So...
No, I appreciate you.
I'm with you.
Not
I'm with you.
calling you out, Rabbi.
I get it.
But
I'm
I'm so
with you.
tired of people telling me we have a tradition of anti-Zionism
Yeah.
before 1948. Before 1948, before 1938.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how, with the knowledge we have of the Shoah, with the knowledge we have of the Farhud, with the knowledge we have of the pogroms in Russia, with the knowledge that we have now, you can credibly anti-Zionism. Look, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. It is.
Right.
I appreciate.
So that of course factors into these grades that you're giving.
Of course it does.
Right? So from the position of the ADL, right, one of the features of being an anti-Semitic institution is the allowance for or the effects of having an anti-Zionist curricula or anti-Zionist clubs and so on. So how does the ADL balance? Again, you said you're not, right, this is not a free speech institution. That's not your advocacy is centered to your advocacy, but it's still, of course, a part of the ethos.
Of course,
right? And so, how do we discuss the combating anti-Zionism, the combating of those memes, the combating of the pathology? I think the infection that has warped.
Yep.
We were talking earlier about we talk about hostages, and God should release the hostages soon, and may all of them be God willing, they're all alive and be brought home. But there is a kind of.
By the way, if there's one thing you should clap for tonight, that's what you should clap for.
Yeah.
Nothing that I said.
Amen.
Clap for that sentiment.
But we talked about another kind of being taken hostage, as it were. It's hard to use that metaphor these days because it's so real, right? But there's a way that the mind now has been warped by anti-Zionism and its conflation with colonialism, like all of these different memes, right? It's a kind of mimetic war. So how do you, at the ADL, like you're weighting these institutions, and you're also, do you think that Gen Zers are going to outgrow? Like, they were Vietnam activists. Are they going to outgrow the craziness of their anti-Zionist platform? Do you think the administrators, like, Clayton Gay and others, are weighing, it turns out that they're anti-Semitic, but are they misinformed? Are they putting too much of an emphasis on free speech with double standards? How do you understand?
There's a lot in there.
Yeah,
No, there's a lot.
Yeah, go.
Well, look, one thing you said in the setup there was like you asked about anti-Semitic institutions. I don't think any of these institutions are anti-Semitic. And I don't think these academics or these professors are, well, for the most part, they're not. But I do think they've gotten caught up, many of them, in this ideology, this post-modern ideology, which fetishizes decolonization and fighting the patriarchy. And look, the other side has done a very good job of inserting Zionism into this framework of evil, which is painful because Zionism is a liberation movement. Zionism about the ingathering of exiles. Zionism about
It's the ultimate
Jews.
decolonizing, because we're
Really
decolonizing what was once ours.
The Jews were enslaved and taken away and brutalized generation after generation, century after century, millennium after millennium. All that being said, I don't know in terms of the young people outgrowing this, quote unquote, but I hope at some point that this fever will break. And you know, we were talking earlier, there was this, I'm sure all of you have seen the video from last week of this young Berkeley law school student at Erwin Chemerinsky's house in his backyard, like committing what, I don't know, used to be called trespassing, and telling him that he was wrong. And his wife, you know, who's not exactly like a weightlifter, asking her to leave, and her being accused of assaulting this woman who's trespassing in his house, who's refusing to leave. And she says in the video, shockingly, stupefyingly, like, the National Lawyers Guild tells me that I have the right to free speech. It is frightening that a law school student can be so poorly informed. There's certainly not a lawyer that I would ever hire. Right. It's like the worst advertisement for the role that you could ever imagine.
Right.
But that being said, maybe this is one of those moments where the fever will break. Because you see someone who clearly is so in the wrong. And by the way, Erwin Chemerinsky is literally an expert in the First Amendment, who has defended the right of student groups at Berkeley to, guess what, not invite Zionists. That's Erwin. And so to think these people, this woman and others, are trespassing in his home is really just shocking. So I don't know that I'm answering your question, but just to bring it back, I think this moment is fraught, and I think these issues, in some ways, they're very nuanced, and in some ways, they're not. Zionism, it is indeed true that Israel, the modern state of Israel, is the culmination of the Herzlian dream, but it's also the culmination, which you're going to read about, well, I don't know, I shouldn't presuppose, but what many of us will read about next week in the Haggadah. Like, Zionism didn't start, you know, with Der Judenstaat.
Right.
It didn't start in 1948. It started, literally, go to your Haggadah. It started with Moses Rabbeinu. And I'm not Moshe Rabbeinu, and I'm not saying that because I'm some messianic, hyper-observant, super pious Jew. I mean, I'm not. But Zionism is so essential to the character, so essential to the identity of what it means to be a Jew. I'm sure somewhere in this building, I don't know, but I would think, there's Siddurim somewhere in this building, there are prayer books somewhere in this building.
Sure.
Right?
Absolutely.
So open any version, flip any page, and you'll find in there references to Yerushalayim and to Zion and to Israel. So I say this because the anti-Zionist is denying the most integral element of our, not our like tradition or ritual, of our identities. Anti-Zionism negates the essence of Jewish identity. Now, I say that, and I'll say in the same breath, I have lots of problems with the policies of the state of Israel. I wish they would do a bunch of things differently. I may have very strong opinions about some of their elected officials who shall remain nameless.
Well, tell me
but
about how
that strong opinion doesn't somehow allow for me to say anti-Zionism is an effective way to talk about that. It isn't.
Well, two things about that, and that also deserves applause, but we'll have big applause at the end.
No, it's fine.
The 2 points. One is that the known anecdote, which is it's truth, is that Ben Gurion carried around the Tanakh, he carried around a Bible, and said, if you want to know where Zionism comes from, he didn't point to Herzl.
Oh, I don't know.
He pointed to the Tanakh.
I didn't know that.
So you don't have to look at the Haggadah. I love that you pointed to the Haggadah. Haggadah is in the 2nd, 3rd century, but the Tanakh, which is already 2,000 years before the Common Era, makes a claim from the beginning. It's from the beginning that, again, you don't have to believe in God and God's authorship of the Bible to believe that we as a people have been a contiguous presence in that piece of land and prayed for it each and every day, 3 times a day. And so, again, the debate about Zionism as a nation state, all of that, again, I agree with you 1,000%. And I just wonder, and I've made this point too, and I maybe you and I differ on this, I don't know, but I made a point on a podcast I was with Dan Sinor and Yossi Klein Halevi a couple of weeks ago, and I said that for me as a Jewish leader, as a rabbi at this moment, I feel that the soft power that I have here in America is analogous to the hard power of my friends in Israel, in that every Israeli is required to go to the army, except a very important group that doesn't, but that's not for now. And whether you agree with Bibi or you don't agree with Bibi, On October 7th, people showed up.
Yeah.
It didn't matter.
100%.
People who were in the last 6 months, people who disagreed vehemently in the previous 9 months about the judicial reform, the so-called judicial reform, all of those, they were together. And I feel the same way in terms of my voice here in America. I recognize, and anybody with any eyes will turn now to what happened last night, could see, anybody with eyes to see how dangerous it is to use our soft power in some way that might weaken the support that America gives to Israel, needed to look no further than last night, and how many Iron Domes saved lives on the ground, how many moments of American support for Israel, and it's the absolutely essential nature of that. And so I think 1,000 times before I say anything, even if I disagree with the Israeli government, I think 1,000 times about how it's going to be weaponized by people who want to use it in order to diminish and in some way weaken Israel. And I will never participate in weakening Israel here in America, ever, ever. And I wonder, so I wonder if, throwing back to you, what your thoughts are around last night, around, how anti-Semitism is bleeding into kind of a world opinion that might weaken Israel, God forbid.
I worry about this every day. I worry about this. I have family in Israel, lots. I have friends in Israel, lots. I have staff there, supporters. And it's so fundamental to who I am. I worry deeply about it every day. And I think, I remember when AOC cried when she had to sign off on Iron Dome funding. She cried. She cried on the well of the House. I wonder what she will do today when she knows that the Iron Dome saved, who knows, tens of thousands of lives, maybe scores of thousands of lives, maybe hundreds of thousands of lives. And I wonder what she'll say when she thinks about the fact that the one person who was not killed but was mortally wounded was a 10-year-old Bedouin Muslim girl. An innocent 10-year-old girl. The only person that Iran managed to touch was a 10-year-old Muslim girl. I mean, really, it is an apt metaphor for the nihilism of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And so I think last night we saw what Israel's extraordinary technology capability allows it to do, and we saw how important the U.S.-Israel alliance is. And we saw, not just America, by the way, Jordan was there. Jordan took out Iranian UAVs. God bless Jordan. Mm-hmm. And we saw the Brits and the Americans and all these other countries. So, I actually think, there's that, it's the Begin quote about trembling knees, when he responded to, I think it was Joe Biden, questioning by Joe Biden, actually, in the Senate, when Joe Biden was a very young legislator. He's, we're not the Jews of trembling knees. We are not the Jews of trembling knees.
Amen.
We are not the Jews of trembling knees. And yet, we need friends. Mm-hmm. Israel's got to find a way to move forward in a way that doesn't leave Israel alone. So I have extraordinary, boundless faith in what that country can do. And I have unlimited, I take unlimited inspiration from what the Jewish people have accomplished. And yet, at the same time, we live in a complicated world, and we need friends. And I think last night really bore that out.
Speaking of friends, we had a rabbi from here in New York who wrote a book, We Have to Talk About Anti-Semitism.
Oh,
Rabbi Diane Fursko.
Yeah.
Diane Fursko. And she told a story. This is an incredible story. She's writing a book about anti-Semitism and comes to a publisher, and the publisher said, it's a good book, but I think you're centering the Jews too much.
That's really funny.
I kid you not, Juju. Honestly, my jaw dropped. It's an unbelievable story. And when you talk about allies, I think that one of the things that my community knows the story. I told the story here on the stage with Barry Weiss. I had my own watershed moment back in 2019 around the Women's March, and I told this to you in the back, where sitting in a room full of rabbis, we were confronting two of the leaders of the Women's March, one of whom had made a very, very ignorant and offensive tweet together with a rabid anti-Semite calling him the greatest of all time, Louis Farrakhan. And I had confronted this person and asked her to recount, and I was shouted down by a colleague. A rabbi said, "I'm ashamed of you that you are speaking that way to one of our allies. We need as a minority to come together." And the reason why I started by asking you about, the resources question about you have to fight for Jews versus justice and fairness for all. I think when we choose our allies, I think you'd probably agree with me that we have to choose our allies who recognize the narrative that you and I were speaking about tonight, that you were telling us about the rise of anti-Semitism, the unique focus needing to be on Jew hatred in various places, and not always needing to say that we're going to be at the front lines with all of our allies before they say we're going to come and help you. It doesn't always have to be.
Yeah, look, I have dedicated, this organization, ADL, was there in the 1950s, filing amicus briefs in Brown v. Education. This organization was there pushing for immigration reform long before it was fashionable. This organization was there marching with Dr. King long before that was in vogue. This organization was there fighting for women's equality. This organization has this extraordinary rich history. And I was very proud. One of my proudest moments as CEO of ADL was in August of last year when I co-chaired the march, the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington with Al Sharpton and MLK III. Now, Al Sharpton has a colorful history in New York, I know, with our community. But he was there and said, I want you and I want the Jewish people on that stage with us, just like Abraham Heschel was there. And I'm forgetting the other rabbi's name who spoke at the march. Someone here will know it. Oh, yeah, Prince. Well, Prince, Rabbi Prince. He said, I want you there. It was unbelievable. And we made sure.
Joachim Prince, yeah.
Joachim Prince. We made sure, ADL did, that it wasn't just us. There were other representatives of the Jewish community, and from the Latino and LGBTQ and Asian American Pacific Islander and other communities. And we had a Muslim imam on the stage, as well as Catholic priest and on and on. And yet now I think we're living in an October 8th world. And I want those allies by our side. I need those allies by my side. And as I said a few minutes ago about Israel, it needs its allies. Israel is a metaphor for all of us in many ways. It is us. The word Israel means the Jewish people. It's us. It's us. And yet at the same time, we've got to be clear-eyed about who those allies are. And so sometimes the people we think are our friends are not. And we need to recognize and have that hard moment where we say, you're not our friend. If you don't recognize that anti-Zionism is a mortal threat to my existence, you're not my friend. And now I will say that we don't have to agree with our friends on everything, but on the big questions, we better. And I think we got to choose better friends. And the rabbi who said to you, how dare you call out my ally? The appropriate response is, how dare you not? How dare you not? How dare you excuse intolerance when it's directed at us? How deep is your self-loathing that you would subordinate, that you would push down your own survival to placate somebody else? So, I got asked the question recently, I think it was at Harvard last week, would ADL work with evangelicals? Look, there are many things where we will not see eye to eye. There are many things where we will not agree. And we have to figure out what are those sort of acid tests. But you know what? We can also find places where we can agree. And I just think I might not agree with some of my liberal allies as well. But again, there are acid tests. And if I have to, in order to work with you, sacrifice myself, put my own children at risk, put my own people in jeopardy, forget it. Do I need to say that that's a bridge too far? And would anyone else do that? I mean, here's a thought exercise.
We wouldn't let anybody else do that.
Of course we would not.
Of course not.
Of course we would not.
It's an amazing moment. I also want to recognize that there are probably quite a few people who would like to ask questions. We're going to have a few minutes for a question. I think the hand definitely suggests that. And we're going to make some different questions. I just want to, we'll finish in a second, but I just wanted to piggyback on that moment and say that the litmus test for me around prayers, because in my own community, my community was very much to the left of where I am right now, because I started the community in a certain place, and I've moved in considerably over the last couple of years. And where I am now, vis-a-vis...
You've got to move. What do these labels even mean?
Yeah,
How can you say you're on the left?
Right.
If you stand with fanatics and fascists, how can you say you're on the left?
Right.
With people who would brutalize babies, How can you say you're on the left in terms of the way we used to think about it?
Yeah, there's a lot.
That's not the left.
It's all becoming very, very, very complicated at this moment. But for me, the litmus test, for me, the acid test, as you said it, is that I won't say anything in my synagogue or allow anything to be said in my synagogue that were an Israeli soldier to walk in right out of Gaza, they would feel we're with you. That you're safe in this space.
Bravo.
That we're gonna pray in a way that says we're family. Now, does that mean that when I'm praying, I'm not praying for the whole world? Of course I'm praying for the whole world. I want everybody in the world to some degree. I want justice, as you said. But at this moment, it's okay to prioritize our family first. It's okay to prioritize our needs first. And that's a general principle in Judaism.
I love it. You know, we had our big conference, Never Is Now. We run the largest.
It was an incredible conference. I know that Laura was there, others were there.
Laura was there. Juju Chang, ladies and gentlemen, was our co-host. But I gave this speech, and I borrowed a line from my friend Archie Gottesman, give her the credit for it, if Jew belong. This is an oxygen mask moment.
Yeah.
An oxygen mask moment. What I mean by that is, for any of you who aren't dozing off when the steward reads the thing,
right.
They say when the oxygen mask comes down, if you're sitting next to your child, you put your oxygen mask on first. Then you put it on the child. So that doesn't mean your child shouldn't get the oxygen mask. They need it. But you put your oxygen mask on first. I think today's date is, let me see, it's October the 8th.
Yeah.
It's October the 8th.
Every day.
And we remain in an oxygen mask moment.
Absolutely. I'm going to pause there. And we have a couple of questions. I think the time allotted for this is about 10 to 15 minutes. We'll see where it goes. Please, and I just want to also preface this by saying that this is a question period. Statements, I will cut you off. Really, this is not a stage. This is not your stage. You've been invited to a conversation. This is the Y stage, and we are on stage. And so, if you will, get up and give a speech, I will cut you off. And thank you so much for it. Please ask a pointed, direct, and answerable question. Thank you. Yes.
It's a great question.
Thanks.
So I will say right up front that I'm not an expert in critical theory or queer theory or any of those things. Let me just say that right. Not so much. I have a lot of people who work for me who are more expert in some of the kind of arcana of academic thought. Now that being said, ADL definitely believes, like for example, in the value of diversity education. I definitely, positively, absolutely believe that I could be a better CEO or a better friend or a better cleric or a better classmate or a better colleague if I understand the people around me. I do. What they've been through, who they are, I believe in that. They better understand me, they're better to me, etc. And at the same time, I would say that I think the sort of DEI industrial complex is part of the reason why we're in this mess. This kind of artifice that forces our kids to play in the oppression Olympics. If you have to play in the oppression Olympics, where you're in team oppressor or team oppressed, everybody loses. I feel strongly about this. So what I can tell you is I want diversity education, but if your idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion involves the exclusion of Jews, you're not just doing it wrong, you're doing a disservice. Mm-hmm. Now, you're miseducating. Now, all that being said, we are one of the largest providers in the United States of anti-bias content in schools. We reach like 4.5 million kids a year. We have done some serious look, sir, at some of our content. We have changed things, we have updated things, we are continually doing that as circumstances change.
Well, what about speaking out against this, making a statement, saying...
About critical theory, specifically?
Yes, on critical theory.
Well, I tell you what I'll do. Hold on, you can stand back up. I will take it on, I will look into, I don't really know a lot about critical theory per se, or again, or queer theory, whatever those things are, but I'll talk to my education team about it, I promise you that, based on your comment to me tonight.
Okay, great.
It's the whole DEI complex. That's
Okay.
the problem.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And in the interest of further DEI and really being DEI, we're going to go to other people with questions.
Good.
Eden.
Hi, thank you so much. So,
What's your name?
My name is Eden.
Hi.
My question is, so if the metric of the ADL is that all anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism,
So anti-Zionism is the ideology that doesn't believe that the Jews have the right to self-determination in their ancestral homeland. That's all it is. It's the idea that Jews don't have the right to self-determine their destiny in their ancestral homeland. That's what it is. So, because Zionism is the right of Jews to self-determine in their ancestral homeland. So Eden, what I would say is that, like, it's not really like you use the word metric. It's not a metric for us. It's kind of black or white. Now, let me elaborate on that. So for me, anti-Zionism manifests in the movement to delegitimize the Jewish state of Israel. Anti-Zionism is those people who don't seek, look, like we believe in a two-state solution at ADL, and I got to tell you, it's been very hard to hold on to that view in light of the last 6+ months. Very difficult.
Yep.
And yet, that being said, I think Palestinians deserve dignity and equality in their own land. But I don't think that has to come at the expense of Jewish safety and security.
Yeah,
Maybe you can follow up after.
Follow-up question, and then we'll keep moving.
The reason I used the word metric is I was thinking of how are you measuring anti-Zionist incidents as anti-Semitic?
Oh, so look, our staff gets lots and lots and lots and lots of calls. But let me give you an example of what would be a distinction, because we investigate everything, right? So if you stand, I don't know, in Central Park and you say Free Palestine, or you march around with the Israeli flag, you can call me at ADL and say, I think I had an anti-Semitic incident. Well, what happened? Well, someone said Free Gaza. Okay, that's not anti-Semitic. When you stand in front of the Hillel and you scream Free Gaza at the people walking into services, that's anti-Semitic. Okay? So when you think that your notion of freeing Palestine involves harassing the customers at a restaurant that happens to be owned by a Jewish person, that's anti-Semitic. Mm-hmm. Right? And when a Jewish woman says, as I saw at Harvard Law School, she is worried about her own safety, and the answer is, something like Free Gaza, that's anti-Semitic.
That's clear. Okay, we're going to move here, and we have a couple more. Yeah.
Okay, I've got 2 questions. I'll be really quick. Firstly, with the universities, as I understand it, I'm from Australia, this is 30 years in the making, all of this. And a part of it, and I'm interested in your view, is also the type of professors that they're employing in these humanitarian, Middle Eastern studies, that are teaching the sort of narrative that allows for this kind of stuff. So I wanted to ask you about that. And secondly, I don't vote here. I'm sort of not left or right. I'm pro-Jewish and pro-Israel. And I feel there's support for Israel, and there's also support for fighting anti-Semitism on the ground here. It's an election year coming up. I heard Jonathan Greenblatt, he said, one of the biggest things you can do, as well as giving money to Israel, is working on your congressmen and women. That is key for us. I don't know if it's ADL space, but what is your advice to people to navigate this election year? Because, I see all the support for Israel, and I saw it all last night. And then you think, the minute if Israel wants to then hit hard back...
Okay, I got it. So what's your name, ma'am? Shelley. So
Thank you.
I'm going to answer Shelley's 2 questions real quick. So first of all, absolutely, the situation on campuses, Shelley, didn't happen yesterday. It didn't start on October the 7th. It started over the last decades. And a lot of this is because, where are the best and brightest of our community going? They're going to Wall Street. They're going to Silicon Valley. They're going to, Fried Frank and Paul Hastings. And really, we need to realize that academia is a very valid, terrific place for our young people to go. We should encourage them to be going there. And we need to do more to make sure that the faculty and the academy broadly writ reflects a diversity of views. Monoculture is bad in every context.
Yes.
Again, this is why I believe in diversity, and you need diversity of thought in the academy too. And we don't have that. And it's not just the Middle East Studies professors, Shelley. I remember a few years ago, a friend of mine who's the chairman of the psychology department at a research university here in New York said to me, Jonathan, you got to look at our crazy mail list. What is it? He said, it's so anti-Zionist. And to be honest, I didn't take him seriously enough. I didn't believe it. But this problem is much more pervasive than just like Middle East Studies. And then to your second question, which is what do you do? Here's one of the lessons I think we should all have since 2016. And by the way, I said this before I got criticized for it.
So do it again.
I'll do it again.
Why not try it again?
I said this, Juju, when I was introducing Jared Kushner at Never Is Now. I said, I don't care how you vote. I care about what you value. I don't care if you vote for a Democrat or a Republican. It's not my business. I'm not here to tell you how to vote, but I am telling you to, again, hold on to and fight for your values. And so what I would say, Shelley, is that it turns out that what we've learned, I think the hard way in 2016, and again, seeing someone like AOC cry on the floor of the House because the Iron Dome gets funded, is that democracy is not a spectator sport.
Yeah.
Democracy is a contact sport, and all of us have to get on the field.
Amen.
So what should you do? Whether you donate or you volunteer or you go run for office yourself or get engaged in a letter writing campaign like Shelley, all of us have the power to help, right this wrong. And we can't rely anymore on somebody else to do it for us. I think that's one of the biggest lessons of this moment.
I'm going to add a little coda to that and then go to the right side of the room. I'm not only on this side too. But a short coda to that is that I will say that, and name it for myself and for many that I'm listening to in my community and in others like mine, that many of those who are voting their values and believe deeply that their values align with the Democratic Party, let's say at this moment, are extremely confused now in ways that are, that maybe in their lifetime they never experienced before.
It turns out there's something bigger than political parties.
Right. And so the
Ask
moment,
this, Jane.
October 7th and 8th has shifted things radically. And I was talking about my friend Dr. Micha Goodman in Israel. We've been talking about, he wrote a book called Hayom HaShmini, The Eighth Day. And it's become a bestseller. It's been out for 3 weeks in Israel, and everybody's
I
reading
don't even know it.
It's Hayom HaShmini, and it's a play. It's
Translated in English.
Multiple puns. He has to get it translated. But it's basically, like, the world in Israel also has changed. Like, October 7th changed everything. And I'm not surprised to hear, a lot of people who would otherwise be voting, down the line or down the ticket because of their quote-unquote values. As Jews, their Jewish identity has a resurgent moment now in a way that shocks them. Like they're going through a real soul search. I just wanted to name that. It might not be true for everybody, but
no, look, like we
so
no
you know
longer have the luxury of this kind of the laziness of partisanship.
Right.
It turns out there's a higher power. And again, I think our Jewish identity, like I said at the top, turns out we thought that as Jews, we're not safe until everyone is safe. But everyone isn't safe if we're not safe.
Right.
And so I think like our
So
Jewish
we're so busy getting everybody else safe, and then it's time to think about being safe. Let me go to this side of the room because I know we're running
You answered part of my question.
Juju, and then behind, yeah.
You answered part of the question, which is you talked about your optimism that the fever would break.
Yeah.
How do we break the fever? What's the medicine?
So Juju asked really like the hardest question, which is how do we break the fever? And that I don't know because there's no silver bullet, right? There's no wand we can wave that will make this go away. This needs to be an all hands on deck effort. The media has a role to play. Community institutions like this one have a role to play. Houses of worship have a role to play. NGOs have a role to play. Business has a role to play. Our elected officials, God help us, have a role to play. And I think the academy has a role to play. It's going to require all of us because there's no one way we do this. And I think the scary thing is there's no playbook. Like we're literally building the plane while we're flying it into a Category 5 hurricane. But I don't think there's another choice.
I would just add one thing around that, which I think is, there is a way that what's essentially happening, in my opinion, is and we agree on this, is that there's a mimetic war. There's like a war of memes, a war of ideas that has been skirmishes and really deep-seated, 2 decades of let's say postmodernism and postcolonialism, all the academy, all of those things kind of came together in the worst imaginable way on October 8th. And I think one of the ways, but I don't know all of them, one of the ways is to be able to make safe spaces again, to be free to speak about, the way that Jonathan feels safe enough to say that DEI is a complex, and whoever's going to come after him for that, or when Barry Weiss was here and people were coming out for her for speaking out. We have to make it safe again to say things that are no longer acceptable to be said, that need to be said, and let there be a war of ideas in public view without the cancellations and without the you can't say that. No. The more those things come to the front and to the fore on stages like this one and other stages in media, the better it will be, frankly, for us to be able to have those conversations. Because, the silencing of it has to end. The silencing of people who say this is going to be bad for the Jews, we have to stand up and say it's already bad for the Jews and we will no longer tolerate it, and we have to actually call it out. So I totally
agree. I don't believe in cancel culture. I think it's the worst thing in the world. I believe, I prefer to use this term, council culture. Someone gets it wrong, help them get it right. Someone says something you don't agree with, then say something back. And like, I don't believe in safe spaces, I believe in brave spaces. And something is deeply wrong, something is like perverted. When Barry Weiss comes here and people want to scream her down, I mean, she has many things, but threatening is not one of them. But really, we should ask the question, like, if you're threatened by the free exchange of ideas, maybe the ideas aren't the problem, maybe you are.
Right. Jonathan hates, right, we have to, right.
Yeah.
All of that work. Okay. Thank you, Juju. Behind Juju, yeah, you've been so patient, yeah.
So Jonathan, I saw the report card on the universities. I thought it was a brilliant idea. Is there any concern though at the organization that maybe Jewish parents are going to look at this and say, maybe I shouldn't send my kids to this school?
What's your name, sir? Evan. So Evan asks, just so everyone can hear, about the report card, any concern, maybe Jewish parents will see it. Look, the way I would say, Evan, is like, I want Jewish parents to look at it at college. Like, by the way, I have 2 children in college myself. I want them to look at colleges with eyes wide open. If the only thing you're using to make a decision about where your child should go to school is our report card, you need to have your head examined. And yet, I think it can be very useful as a data point. But what we really want to do, Evan, what we tried to, and by the way, again, I know a lot of people are angry at me. I saw a letter from one Hillel director who I won't name. And this person's response to our report card, which graded that university poorly. This person said, I just had a great day. We had an IDF speaker, and now we have in our Hillel, and now we have something going on in the Hillel, and tomorrow morning we have this in the Hillel, and we're having a great time at the Hillel, and things are pretty great here. And I'm like, if your idea of Jewish identity is enclosed in 4 walls of a Hillel,
Yes.
then again, maybe you're missing something.
Right.
Maybe, and by the way, Hillels, and we have a deep partnership with Hillel International. I feel very strongly about the work that they do, very positively. But one of the reasons why Hillels are having such a resurgence now is because it's the only place kids feel safe. So look, I know that a lot of people don't like the report card, but my goal is a race to the top. My goal is to create an empirical, like objective benchmark that now when I would have so many university presidents say, what do you want us to do? Here's what I want you to do.
Exactly.
And I want you to get an A. And now there is no excuse.
Amen. Amen. Kol hakavod. Really amazing. I have a couple of colleges I want to ask you about because my nephew is about to go.
We'll do it.
Talk about it later. Okay. I think that I just want to go by hands, but I know Stacy had her hand up. And yeah, Stacy, go ahead.
Thank you for being here. At the beginning, you cited data increases with a lot of acceleration.
Yeah.
Why do you posit that is?
It's a good question. So Stacy asks, why is the trends going the wrong direction? So I think there are a few factors. I think number one, I mean, you alluded to President Trump before. I think, look, whether you like President Trump or don't like President Trump doesn't matter to me, but 2016 was a watershed moment, and Trump kind of gave people permission to express prejudice in public, not just prejudice, all kinds of things. And look, liberal democracy is the best thing for the Jewish people, since like, I don't know, Zabars or something, right? Like, literally, it has been so fundamental to our success in this country. And President Trump exuded a kind of a liberalism and literally gave people permission to say things and do things that were really quite off the wall. And by the way, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. As much as he kind of enabled the liberalism of the right, there's also been this kind of radicalism of the left that's been the response to it. So number one, I think he normalized bigotry in the public square, and it almost always inevitably starts with the Jews. I think secondly, extremists felt emboldened by that. And extremists came out in droves. And look, I could give you a zillion examples, Stacey, which I can do offline, but the bottom line is that an environment was created, extremists felt emboldened, and then quite frankly, social media amplified, intensified, and spread this like the plague. Social media is a super spreader of anti-Semitism and hate. Those things combined with a broader kind of like geopolitical dynamic of the haves and the have-nots. And this rise of populism is a response to systems failing. The political system fails, and there's distrust in institutions, and you don't believe the media and the judiciary. The populace shows up and says, it's not complicated, it's simple. It's their fault. And in an environment where scapegoating becomes the kind of strategy of choice, It always starts with the Jews. So again, I think we saw anti-Semitism normalized. We saw extremists emboldened. Social media amplified it all. And then finally, this, again, broader political dynamic has created the conditions in which it's a perfect storm.
So I think we're actually running a little bit late, so I'm sorry. I know there's still people with hands and lots of
Let's take a
important
couple
questions.
super quick questions.
Sure, okay.
I'm happy.
I mean, I'm just thanking
You go bang, bang,
thanking
bang, and I'll try to answer.
I'm thanking my AV team and the Y team also, because they're staying a little bit later, but
don't
thank
have
you
to
all.
wait.
They're always amazing. Great conversation. We only get Jonathan for this moment, so take a couple of bang, bang questions. Okay.
Bang, bang questions.
Bang, bang questions. Let's take you
Just
right
tell me your name and your bang, bang question.
one, and just ask your question, and then
I'll make it quick. Hi, I'm Liza. Thank you.
What's your name?
Liza.
Liza.
As someone, a young person in the workplace, young person on social media, obviously you see a lot of anti-Semitism. If you could say, and this was actually, what's a one-liner that you can say in terms of, I want you to empathize and to stand in the shoes of mine, or, I stand as I have in your place. You can give a one-liner, and it's, I know it's so much more complicated than that, but that's exactly
Okay.
it.
Great.
I'll try.
thanks, Liza. Behind you, Liza, there was a man with yeah. You had your hand up? Go ahead, quick.
What's your name?
David Gordon, I have a very quick question. My son goes to a small liberal arts college. There have been 2 incidents of swastikas painted in the bathroom. There were some other things going on. The SGSP, whatever it is there. What can I do as a parent?
Gotcha.
I'm going to the student.
I'll help you.
Got it. Thanks. 2 more, and then we're done. 4 is a good number. Yeah.
I've read that Qatar is a major.
What's your name?
Arthur
Arthur. Qatar.
is a major donor
To universities.
Yep.
upwards of billions of dollars.
Yeah.
How do we track that, and why are they even allowed to do that?
Okay.
Great. Last question.
We've talked about allies.
What's your name?
I'm Scott.
Scott.
We've talked about allies not being there for us. When you think of a post-October 7th world, can you list 5 people who rose to the occasion in ways you didn't expect?
Okay.
Great. 4 good ones.
All right. Number one.
The
Liza.
4 questions. Pass those.
4 questions.
4
That's where you were
questions.
going with this.
No, you're 4 questions. It's always working.
The rabbi.
Always working.
The rabbi. Very
I got to
good.
earn my keep here, guys.
Very good.
Thank you. Go ahead. Yeah.
So I wish I don't have a great one-liner, Liza. I just got to be honest with you. I'm not that quick-witted or smart, but I'll think about it, and I'll get your you'll give my coordinates to Gail Cohen, my deputy chief of staff, who's here, and I'll figure that out. I don't have a good one-liner. To David will definitely help you and your son. So please talk to Gail, and literally, I don't want you to have to reveal what that college is, but I am positive we can help. Do you know if they were in the report card? They weren't? We'll help. Period. End of story. To Arthur, again, as I said at the top, we're very evidence-based. So I know it is true that Qatar has spent a lot of money in higher education in recent years, opening campuses like Cornell and Northwestern, my alma mater. And yet the fact of the matter is that I'm sure that for academics who are there or university presidents who are there, it may be hard to criticize Qatar if they have a deep relationship. I get that, right? It could be hard at the Romamu to criticize. You've got a big donor, right? On the other hand, I don't have any hard evidence that I can point to that substantiates the claim. I know my colleagues and friends at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy have done some really good work on this, and I'd encourage you to look at their research. I just don't have, the evidence myself to say this is exactly what's going on. I don't know. And then finally, to Scott's question, allies who rose to the occasion. I can mention a few. So number one, I think about Reverend Sharpton. The first call that I got on October the 7th was from Reverend Sharpton, from a non-Jewish person. He said, what can I do? I said, you guys should make a statement. Within 24 hours, National Action Network, Drum Major Institute, which is MLK3's organization, along with NAACP, Urban League, and a few others, released a statement. He did that. Didn't have to. And then a few days later, he gave me an award from the National Action Network, their annual thing at Jazz at Lincoln Center. And at a time when, again, all the crazies were beginning to rally, he put his arm around me and said, we in the black community need to stand with the Jewish community. It was very powerful.
Mayor Adams, too.
Mayor Adams would be number 2. Mayor Adams was so good. Clear-eyed, grounded in just decency and humanity. Michael Lomax from the United Negro College Fund has been also really, really good on this and organized Black University presidents. Number 4, Robert Kraft.
Yeah.
Robert Kraft is a man who could be doing so much with his money, buying more sports teams, I don't know. And yet he has chosen to dedicate hundreds of millions of dollars to fighting anti-Semitism. Who does that? Who does that at 80-something years old, says, this is my next act? Like, what he's done is extraordinary. And look, we don't make commercials at ADL, so I'm not maybe the best judge of it, but what I saw at the Super Bowl, what I watched on NBA games, what I saw at the Oscars, incredible. Yeah. So I think Robert Kraft is someone who stepped up dramatically. And the last person I'll just mention, maybe it was just a little thing, but I don't know if you saw, they were performing at whatever they called that thing in Las Vegas, but Bono from U2 gave a performance.
Yeah, that was good.
That still gives me the chills. And he did one of his songs, and he talked about the Stars of David and the people who'd been killed, taken hostage, and it blew me away. So there you go. Bono, Bob Kraft, Eric Adams, Michael Lomax, and Al Sharpton.
So
probably not what you were expecting, right?
So you know, so as we close, and thank you for your bringing us into Passover, and thank you also to Jonathan for the reference earlier in the conversation to the Haggadah. So I think we'll close with the Haggadah and two well-known adages that mirror each other, say something quite different, but mirror each other. The Haggadah is based on the Mishnah in the 2nd century, the first compendium of rabbinic teachings, rabbinic law. The Mishnah in Tractate Psachim says, "B'chol dor v'dor chayav adam lir'ot et atzmo ki'ilu hu yatsa mitzrayim." In every generation, we are obligated to see ourselves as if we ourselves left Egypt. And this year more than ever, right, that adage is, you know, it's not an imaginal exercise. It's not a huge leap of kind of dreaming or meditative trance. We're literally in a moment of you know, radical liberation, redemption, but also awareness of how tenuous this is, this project. And the second adage is, "B'chol dor v'dor kamim aleinu l'chalotenu," that in every generation they arise those who are ignorant, those who are filled with hatred, and they make an effort to hurt us as the Jewish people. And the adage finishes with this very theological statement, "V'akadosh Baruch Hu matzilenu miyadam," and God is the one who saves us. And maybe if you're theologically so inclined, if that's your way, and I am of that, I'd say I see God's hand in last night's miraculous intervention. But I always say every year to my community that Passover is a bad marketing campaign, because Passover is God's movement in Passover, meaning the word Passover, Pesach means the skipping over of houses. You know, it's very theologically.
Right.
But I like to say that if we were to remarket it, we'd say it's passed through, because Jews had to walk through that door. They had to take the courageous step. They had to be the ones who believed deeply that they could change history, that if they did something small, like, you know, this little lamb, and they just went through, that would matter. And I just want to say that, you know, you've said tonight so many things that remind us of the importance of our own initiative, our own agency, that it's not just passing over, but passing through. We also have to do things to make sure that universities are safe spaces, to make sure that people in Congress right now at this moment, when the New York Times is writing editorials about making support for Israel, you know, contingent, that we're fighting back and saying that, you know, this small little country deserves self-determination, deserves to be safe, and you're leading the charge. And I know that most people probably know this already, but let me just reiterate. Your job, you already said how many people are angry at you tonight. That was a recurring theme. It's not, you know, it's not the most comfortable thing to be out there being the watchdog to make sure that people are making spaces safe for Jews. And it's a holy job. I want to say that as a rabbi, I want to say to you, it's a holy job for you to be out there advocating for Jews, making sure that in the public space we're not just making a world that's safe and fair for all, but safe and fair for Jews. And that's a big deal. And I want to thank you for that, Jonathan. And it's really great to have you here. Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you so much. Thank you.